And now Roman numeral 3, in which we talk about businessmen. Now, business during the Gilded Age is, again, somewhat of a controversial area. There's a lot of dispute over what exactly they should be called and how much respect we should give them. There are two terms that get used here a lot. It's the robber baron and the captain of industry. The term robber baron is a negative term. It's an insult. The logic being that you refer to these people as robber barons as these are the guys who abused their workers, stole from the government, and became rich on the public's dime and by taking things that should belong to the public. But the term captain of industry is a term of respect. It means that these are guys who pulled themselves up from their bootstraps from nothing, who rose to prominence and cornered an industry where no one else thought they could. Both terms are applying to the same people. Which one you think belongs basically determines, or essentially is because of which end you were on. If you were one of them, captain of industry made perfect sense. If you were a worker, robber baron made a lot more sense. Basically, during the Gilded Age, 5 men effectively controlled America. Or really, 4 or 5, depending upon who you really give credit to. But again, there's basically... These individuals had more power than the present. There are 4 guys who could really essentially sink the country if they wanted to. And that kind of power is a scary thing, especially since some of them were not nice people. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We start with Andrew Carnegie, one of the nicer guys. Carnegie became a financial genius, or became rich, I should say, through the use of steel and steel production. Carnegie Hall is his. Carnegie Steel is his big business. But in any case, he got his money through the steel industry and through the master of what he called vertical integration. Vertical integration is when you buy up all the elements of production. You buy up every stage in the process. So he owned the coal mines, he owned the railroads getting him the coal, and the miners getting him the coal. He owned the steel mills, and he owned the distribution method for the steel. By owning each step in the process, he could essentially charge himself less, which allowed him to make more money in the end. So this was vertical integration. This was something that he had pioneered. And this allowed Carnegie to become incredibly wealthy. But the thing about Carnegie, and the reason why he gets generally more credit than a lot of the other robber barons / captains of industry, is because he gave away a lot of his money. He was a big believer in what he called the gospel of wealth. The gospel of wealth is basically you can't take it with you. And what Carnegie was basically arguing is that, what's the point of having hundreds of millions of dollars and going to your grave with it and making your children rich? That's not going to help save your soul at night or help you sleep better. And so instead he focused, especially in his later years, on using his wealth for public good. He built, again, Carnegie Hall, the famous concert hall, was created solely by him. He created public libraries in hundreds of U.S. cities. He created Carnegie Mellon University. That was created by him. Again, to found, for the future generations of engineers. So Carnegie gets a lot of credit and a lot more respect for being a very, very nice individual with his money and so forth. On the other end of the scale in terms of niceness, you've got John D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller got his money in oil. He was based out of Maryland, Baltimore area, and got his money primarily through oil. And his technique was, or his company I should say first, is called Standard Oil. Standard Oil is his organization, and it was, for a time, the only major U.S. oil company. All of the U.S. oil production was through Standard Oil. Whereas Carnegie made his money through vertical integration, Rockefeller prefers horizontal integration. Horizontal integration is just buying out all of your competitors, knock out everybody on the same level. What Rockefeller was famous for doing was basically, again, trying to buy his competition, or at the very least bribe them into working with him. If he couldn't outright buy your company, instead he created a cartel. A cartel is a loose collection of his businesses. They're not owned by the same person, but instead work together for the good of the industry. For example, he would basically partner with other oil companies and be like, hey, we're not going to sell oil for anything less than $30 a barrel. Cartels give way also to trusts. Trusts are business alliances, even outside of the same field. The idea is that it's an actual sort of secret alliance between businesses where they cut each other deals and control prices so that everybody in the trust is making money. The problem is that the trusts, again, are making money for only themselves, and they're using this to basically eliminate competition, which does not do well for the public. The other thing that Rockefeller is famous for is the idea of the economics of scale. In order to drive his opponents out of business, Rockefeller would give his opponents a choice. They could either join him in a trust or a cartel, or if they didn't, he would drive his prices low, lower than they could ever hope to go. And once they're knocked out of the picture, raise them back up again. The reason he could get away with this is his business was so big, he could handle a small loss in, like, say, one area. And so once that area has been taken care of, he can go back to just charging whatever he felt like. This economics of scale, again, basically made him untouchable. If you've heard the phrase "too big to fail," that's basically what Rockefeller was. His oil company was so big that nobody could touch him, because what could possibly happen? What could possibly affect him? Trying to think if there's anything else really of economic scale. He's not the only one who uses economics of scale, but he's one of the major players in economics of scale. The third major robber baron / captain of industry, J.P. Morgan. Morgan's claim to fame was banking. His big thing was Chase Manhattan Bank. You might have heard of it. It's just called Chase Bank today. But the full name of it is J.P. Morgan Chase Manhattan Bank. It's a huge, long name. He was, again, a banker and cornered the market on banking. In fact, he actually loaned the U.S. government money during the Panic of 1893, basically to keep the country functioning. That's how powerful he was. If he wanted to, he could have crashed the economy. Your fourth one, Vanderbilt. Cornelius Vanderbilt was a railroad baron. Vanderbilt University, named after him. Biltmore, that's him. The Vanderbilt estate, that's his. His thing, again, was railroads. And of all four of them, he's probably the biggest jerk. Remember we were talking about the economics of scale? Vanderbilt did the same thing with railroads, but into an absurd degree. If you wouldn't work with him, he would drive his ticket prices down to like 10 cents until everyone got knocked out of business, and then he would ratchet them up to like $50. Because what are you going to do about it? And so, again, these guys were sort of jerks about it. Now, you might think that the public would be outraged and call for these guys' heads and try and shove them out. But the fact was that culture sort of looked up to these guys. We looked up to them as examples of what would happen. This was part of a larger theory called social Darwinism. Social Darwinism was the theory that took the Darwinist philosophy of survival of the fittest and applied it to business. Darwinism, for those of you who don't remember the term, Darwinism was Charles Darwin's theory that animals that are best suited to survive in the environment will procreate and survive. They will go on and thrive. So, when monkeys get a thumb, they reproduce and create more monkeys with thumbs, and eventually so on and so forth. The same logic is true here. So in other words, like, if a businessman comes up with an idea and it is a good idea, he will become rich and he will become prosperous and so forth. If it's a bad idea, he will go broke, and there's nothing we can do about it. So in other words, these guys are wealthy and powerful because they are smarter than you. They are better than you. So social Darwinism takes the idea of Darwinism and applies it to society and basically says, the rich are rich because they're better. They are smarter, they are more adept, they are stronger, etc., etc., etc. Trying to interfere with that is just going to ruin the natural order of things. So, yeah, Vanderbilt's a jerk, but that's okay. It's what he's born to do. He is, the man. This is embodied by Horatio Alger. Horatio Alger was an author who wrote stories, all very cheap dime store novels and so forth. All about rags to riches. They're all things like the Shoeshine Boy and so forth. And the plot of the Horatio Alger stories are all the same. It's all about an orphan or a little kid who is born poor, but through pluck and determination grows up and becomes rich and famous and happy and healthy. This is, again, the spirit of the period. This is what we all thought we could do. If you could just work harder, you too could fix this, that sort of thing. It's not exactly true. Because again, of course, during this time period, the actual number of people who could rise up to that level is absurdly small. But we all wanted to embrace it. The theory was that, most people would rather embrace the hope of being rich than face the reality of being poor. And so this is why, they weren't, like scrambling at the doors in order to knock them down. Now, there were some people who complained about tactics like Rockefeller and so forth. And so as a result, the government did try to do something. The Sherman Antitrust Act was passed. The Sherman Antitrust Act was an act that, like you might think, tried to ban, or at least try to control, the trusts. The flaw in this is that it had no teeth, and no one ever really bothered to use it. At the time, it was basically just a showpiece. It was a way for government officials to say, hey, yes, we take your concerns seriously. Look, we passed this law. In reality, though, they didn't care. The Sherman Antitrust Act, though, will become important later when Teddy Roosevelt becomes president, because he actually will use the Sherman Antitrust Act to get things accomplished. So, foreshadowing. Now, we'll take a brief pause and go on into Roman numeral 4, workers and strikes, in just a few moments.